that. Hello, I'm Officer Cadet Gambesha. And I'm Officer Cadet Withers. Today we will be presenting Portugal at the turn of the 15th century. Let's get started. Located on the west of the Iberian Peninsula, bordering the country of Spain, or what would have been at the beginning of the 15th century, the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon to the north and east, as well as the Atlantic Ocean to the south and west. Its coastal location meant that activities like fishing became central to the Portuguese economy. Portugal would eventually rise to establish control of sea trade and become one of the great powers in European colonization. In Chapter 12 of Strayer and Nelson's Ways of the World, Portugal is described to have been similar to many other communities in Europe at the turn of the 15th century, and we can compare this to China. However, unlike China, whose methods of state building at the time consisted of a more united and centralized government, Europe became composed of many smaller, independent nation states whose competitive nature made for a greater division across the continent. Now, the early modern period in Europe ushered in a great deal of new ideas and innovation, one of the most important being globalization, to which Portugal was a central component. After the expulsion of the Moors from Portuguese territories during the Reconquista, ideas of expansion and discovery began to emerge. It was this surge in exploration that led to the colonization of the Azores and many other nearby islands, and eventually the coast of Africa, with Portuguese explorer Bartolomeu Dias successfully completing the first navigation around the southern tip of Africa in 1488. Being that it was situated on the Atlantic coast, the fishing industry in Portugal was also an integral part of its economy. So much so that many suggest that Portuguese fishermen had discovered the Grand Banks and had been fishing cod there even before Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. Nonetheless, the Portuguese were considered to have been the first out of the gate and were the forerunners in a new age of exploration. So there are many ways that geography influenced Portugal. One of those ways is maritime exploration. Portugal's vast Atlantic coast and proximity to Africa shaped its destiny. Under the patronage of Prince Henry the Navigator, Portuguese sailors explored the African coast, eventually discovering a sea route to India by Vasco da Gama in 1498. Another aspect is its strategic position. Situated as the westernmost country in Europe, Portugal had easier access to trade routes, particularly the spice trade, turning it into a trade hub. Of course, those aren't the two only ways that geography influenced Portugal. Two other things I will talk about in this slide is colonialism and Atlantic weather. For colonialism, its proximity to Africa allowed Portugal to establish trade posts along the colonies, leading to territories like Ceuta, Madura, and the Azores, which paved the way for colonies in Brazil, Goa, which is in India, and Macau, which is in China. And also, navigational techniques that were developed because of the Atlantic weather. The chaotic weather of the Atlantic Ocean forced Portuguese sailors to develop advanced navigational techniques like the astrolabe and caravel to be able to surpass the dangers and risks of going through open waters in the Atlantic Ocean. Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama was born in 1460 in Sienese, Portugal. In 1497, he was tasked by Prince Manuel to find a sea route to India. In this source, da Gama documents about his encounter with the native people as they make landfall in South Africa. He writes, "The inhabitants of this country are tawny-colored. Their food is confined to the flesh of seals, whales, and gazelles, and the roots of herbs. They are dressed in skins and wear sheaths of their virile members. They are armed with poles of olive wood to which a horn, browned in the fire, is attached. Their numerous dogs resemble those of Portugal and bark like them. The birds of the country, likewise, are the same as in Portugal, and include cormorants, gulls, turtle-doves, crested larks, and many others." In reading this source, we can observe that the Portuguese and most likely other European explorers at the time were very much unaware of other cultures and groups of people. It reveals to us that because Europeans had never made contact and trade with these people, they had very little understanding of race and ethnicity, as well as the consistency in nature and animals in different geographical locations. It shows how this new era of exploration led to these new discoveries and understandings of how different peoples and societies functioned, not only for the Portuguese, but also Europe as a whole. Another way that we can analyze Portugal at the turn of the 15th century is how it compared with other countries of the time, or the communities of the time. Um, although most European countries, continental European countries, I should say, were consolidating the power in Europe, Portugal sought a different way to expand their borders to develop themselves. Portugal's unique focus was on maritime exploration, then that set them apart from the rest of Europe. Portugal was trying to find new trade routes, we're trying to make new colonies, everything outside of Europe, and that was its way of expanding, not through war, not through military, but through trade, through economy. Um, this is still while competing with Spain. Spain was another exception that were also trying to do maritime exploration and trade and building their empire. They were still competition in that aspect. Another thing that made Portugal different from the rest of the communities is its contacts with Africa. Portugal's proximity to Africa led to extensive interactions with African kingdoms, which resulted in the exchange of gold, ivory, and slaves. This not only made Portugal richer, it facilitated further exploration, even more colonization. And also in Asia, Portugal's primary focus was on the east because of the Treaty of Tordesillas, which divided the world in the west for Spain and the east for Portugal. So this contrasted the America's focused Spanish Empire, and Portugal then had cooperation with a lot of local rulers in India and modern day Indonesia, which was once the Spice Islands. They wouldn't conquer them. They would try to establish crucial trade links, which is why they would mostly focus on befriending and cooperating with local rulers. Portugal still has importance today, and people should learn about Portugal in classes because there are many things that we need to learn about, and we have to look at Portugal to understand them. One of these, colonial foundations. To understand the history of colonialism, we need to look at Portugal. That's where it all began. Furthermore, global exploration and trade also mostly began with Portugal. Another thing that we can learn from Portugal is its global impact. Portugal's legacy is felt in countries that were once its colonies, such as Brazil, Angola, and Mozambique, those being the biggest ones. Obviously, Portugal had an influence everywhere, even in Canada, with cities like St. John's being founded by Portuguese sailors. Geopolitical significance. Portugal's strategic location connected it to Africa, Asia, and South America, providing valuable lessons about trade networks, global affairs, and international relations. Globalization. Portugal played a pivotal role in the early stages of globalization, with lessons about the exchange of goods, technologies, and cultural practices that continue to shape our world. In conclusion, Portugal's history, influenced by its geography, offers a window into the age of exploration, colonialism, and the foundations of globalization. It provides invaluable insights into the past and helps us better understand the complexities of our interconnected world today. Therefore, there is a compelling reason to continue studying Portugal's history in our modern history classes. All right, well, thank you for listening to our presentation. We hope we were able to teach you a lot about Portugal and how it influenced our world today and how it continues to influence our world today through its legacy, its impact, and its actions of the past. With further ado, have a nice day. Oh, wait, the sources, right? And here were the sources used for our presentation. Thank you.